Halloween, 1989, in Richmond, Maine, a town predominantly of Russian immigrants. Four teenage boys, Alex, Baron, Anatol, and Nikolai, aged 16 to 17 years old, had plans for the night, but that all changed when they stumbled into a place they should have never entered. This is their story, as was told by Nikolai years later. If I could take back the decisions we made that night, I would in a heartbeat. We like causing mischief, but we're not malicious by nature. We were just having some fun, but karma doesn't play fair, I guess. Weeks before Halloween, we'd been planning what we wanted to do, and as it got closer, the more excited we got. We'd all been friends since grade school and always loved Halloween, but this was going to be the funnest one yet, or so we thought. Once school let out at 3 p.m., we all hopped into Alex's car, which was an old, rust covered, musty smelling, lime green gremlin. Being Alex was the only one who had wheels, we didn't complain about how much we all hated riding in it. We then drove to Baron's home because his room was in the basement, and the door leading to it was in the back of the house. This meant we could avoid meeting his parents and avoid getting asked any questions. Our plan was to wait there until 6, then head out for a night of fun. As we sat there in Baron's room, the excitement in the air was strong. We could barely contain ourselves as we talked and laughed about all the things we were planning to do. Anatol, being the craziest one though, had some ideas of things we should do that made even me cringe and immediately say, "No way, man." But it was fun to think about nonetheless. When it hit 6 p.m., we jumped up and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, I could see the sun had already set and darkness was settling in. This only added to our excitement, as this meant the kids were out trick or treating now, and one of our plans for the night was about to be executed. We quickly piled into the gremlin and took off down the road. Our plan was to snatch buckets of candy from kids we came across, and we each planned on taking a turn. It wasn't long before we saw our first victims. It was a group of 4 to 5 kids walking down the middle of the street with no adults in sight. Perfect targets, we thought. Baron was the first one up, so he rolled down the window and readied himself so he could quickly snatch a bucket. As we got closer to them, Baron was already halfway out the window when he yelled, "Give me that bucket," then quickly grabbed it from one of the kids. Once he was back inside the car, Alex hit the gas and we took off speeding down the road. As I looked out the back window, I could see the kid whose bucket we took was distraught, as were the other kids in the group. No matter though, we all laughed and passed around the bucket, sharing the candy we'd just stolen. For the next hour or so, we continued driving, finding kids, and taking their candy. Once we got bored doing that, it was on to our next plan. None of us had ever drank alcohol, but we talked about doing it for quite some time. We were too young, of course, to buy it legally, so our plan was to steal a couple of six-packs from the gas station. We had a good plan for stealing it as well. 2 of us would be distractions, and the other 2 would steal a six-pack. When we pulled in and parked in front of the gas station, that was the most nervous I'd ever been. I'd never stolen anything in my life. Anatol made it sound so easy, but I wasn't so sure. The plan was for Alex and Baron to buy snacks at the same time, thus creating a wall where hopefully the clerk couldn't see Anatol and me stealing the beer, as the location of the fridge that stored the beer was in front of the counter, so we thought we had a good chance of getting away with it. As we walked inside, I looked over at the clerk who was refilling the shelves behind him with cigarettes. I remember thinking we're off to a good start as I headed over to act like I was looking at a magazine, which was close to the beer. It didn't take them long to grab their snacks, walk up to the counter, and start paying. I then quickly walked over to the fridge, opened it, grabbed the closest six-pack I could, stuffed it into my coat, and then walked back to the magazines. As I picked up a magazine, I looked over towards the direction of the clerk and could see Alex and Baron were talking to him about something. Right then, I noticed Anatol putting a six-pack into his coat, then walked back towards Alex and Baron. I set down the magazine and walked towards my friends as well. Anatol and I stood behind them as they finished paying. Then without hesitation, we all quickly walked outside and jumped into the car. Once the car's doors were shut, we started hooting and hollering with excitement. A surge of adrenaline went through me as I realized we just pulled it off. Alex didn't waste any time starting up the car and getting the hell out of there. As we drove down the road, we talked about where we should go drink the six-packs. Alex mentioned we should go to the church a couple miles down the road that had been abandoned for years. It used to be a Russian Orthodox church, but was boarded up and had been that way since I could remember. We'd all heard the stories growing up about how the priest who lived there just up and vanished one day without a trace. The rumor was it had something to do with the church building itself, and we were always warned to stay away. We just chalked it up as parents saying that so kids wouldn't venture inside. A few minutes later, Anatol blurted out, "Hey, stop the car." "Why, what's up?" asked Alex. "Just stop the car, man," replied Anatol. Alex hit the brakes, stopping the car, at which point Anatol jumped out, ran over to the sidewalk, and grabbed a lone kid that was walking there. I hadn't noticed the kid was on the sidewalk until then. Anatol ran back to the car and climbed inside, still holding the kid, who was kicking and screaming to be let go. "Man, what the hell are you doing?" "Let that kid go," said Baron. "Yeah, what are you doing?" "Don't be stupid," said Alex. "Calm down, guys. I'm not going to do anything to the kid. Just want to scare him is all," replied Anatol. I didn't say anything as I was shocked as to what was happening. My head was spinning. "Whatever, man, you just better let that kid go soon," said Baron. "Yeah, I plan on it, sissy," replied Anatol. We rode in silence the rest of the way to the church. Even the kid stopped kicking and screaming. He'd listened to the conversation, so I assumed he thought he was going to be let go soon, but who really knew with Anatol? I often wondered what went through his head. As we pulled up to the abandoned church, I started having second thoughts as to what we were doing and where this was all going. It had been fun up until Anatol grabbed the kid, and I still couldn't believe he'd done it. Over the years, my family had often driven past this abandoned church, but I never actually paid close attention to it. All the windows and doors were boarded up, and it looked like it needed to be torn down. As we stepped out of the car, we each reached for the flashlights we'd brought, and Alex said, "I got a crowbar in the back in case we need to pry open the back door." "Grab it, would you? We're most likely going to need it," said Anatol as he stood up, still holding the kid. I remember standing there looking at the kid's face as he glared at me without saying a word. "Just let him go, Anatol," I said. "Dude, I'm going to let him go once we get inside and he's good and scared," replied Anatol. As we stood there, Alex went over to the back door and started prying it open. "Come on, guys, it's opened," he said. We then proceeded to walk inside. Once inside, the smell of dust and old rot hit me. It was easy to see no one had set foot inside there for a very long time. Anatol then walked over to one of the church's benches, put the kid down, pointed at him and said, "Kid, do not move from that bench until I tell you. Got it?" The kid just looked at him and nodded his head. "Let's crack open the beer. I've been waiting all day for one," said Alex. "Good idea," replied Baron. We each grabbed a beer from one of the six-packs we'd stolen, cracked it open, and had a sip. I almost spit mine out at first. It was not at all what I expected. The guys laughed at me as I struggled to keep it in my mouth. Not bad. Different than what I thought it'd be," said Alex. "Yeah, definitely different," said Baron. We didn't say much as we finished drinking our beers. Once finished, Anatol threw his empty can across the room and said, "It's time we check this place out." He then started walking around the church. The church looked bigger inside than it did from the outside, and it looked like there were several doors that led to other rooms. A few minutes went by as I started to feel funny but good. I guessed it was the beer, and I hadn't eaten much since lunch. Suddenly, Anatol blurted out, "Hey guys, get in here." We all quickly ran to where we'd last seen him. He'd gone through one of the doors at the other end of the church. When we went inside the room, we could see him standing in front of a closed door. As we walked up to the door, we could see the word Drakovac carved into it. We each said the word aloud, and we all spoke decent Russian, being that's where our grandparents had immigrated from, but none of us knew what this word meant. Anatol then tried opening the door, but it was locked with a deadbolt that needed a key. "Come on, let's go finish the beers before it gets too late," said Alex. "Let's try and open this door first. I want to see what's on the other side," replied Anatol. He then pointed to Baron and said, "Go get the crowbar, man." "Fine, if it'll make you shut up. Also, you have to release the kid after we do this," replied Baron as he walked back to the main area of the church to grab the crowbar. "Hey, you guys, the kid is gone," shouted Baron from the other room. "So what? Who cares? Get your ass in here so we can open this door up," replied Anatol. Baron then came walking back and said, "Let's hurry the hell up before that kid runs and tells someone what happened and where we're at." Yeah, just come here," replied Anatol as he motioned to Baron to put the crowbar between the door and the door frame. Once the crowbar was in place, both of them started pulling as hard as they could, trying to pry the door open. Just when I thought they couldn't do it and they'd give up, the wooden door made a cracking sound and it popped open. Right then, an ungodly smell hit our noses, and Alex blurted out, "What in God's name is that smell? I've never smelled anything like it before." "I don't know, and I don't want to find out," I said. "Bring your flashlight over here, Nikolai," said Baron. I walked over, handed it to him, and took a step back. It was already on, so he took it and shined it down into the darkness. "Holy hell, it just goes down into a deep, dark hole," said Baron. We all quickly walked over and stood next to Baron, looking down into the hole. It was in fact deep and dark, and no bottom we could see. "Unless you guys plan on jumping down into that thing, I say we get out of here before someone comes. The kid, remember," said Alex. "Yeah, we'd better split," I said as I started backing up away from the hole. "Agreed, let's leave now," said Baron. We turned to leave when suddenly we heard what sounded like the cries of a baby, coming from down in the hole. We immediately froze in place, looking at each other. I could see they were visibly shaking, as was I. "What in the hell was that?" asked Anatol. "I don't know, and I don't want to stick around to find out. Let's go," replied Baron. As we turned to leave, the sound of the crying baby started to get louder and louder. Without hesitation, we started running towards the main area of the church and the door we'd come in. Once there, Baron pushed open the piece of plywood, holding it open to let us go through. As I stood there waiting for my turn, I heard the cries more clearly now. Whatever it was now in the room we were just in, I thought. Terror shot through me as I pushed my way through to the outside. Once I cleared the plywood and stepped outside, I heard Baron behind me scream, "What the?" His sentence was then cut off. I waited to see if he would come out. After a bit, he didn't appear, so I immediately grabbed a big piece of plywood, pulled it open, and stuck my head back inside, flashlight in hand. I scanned the immediate area, but Baron was nowhere in sight. I stuck my head back outside and yelled at Alex and Anatol. "Something's happened to Baron. We need to find him." Both of them were almost inside the car but came running back. "Where is he?" asked Alex. "I'm not sure. He was right behind me, then I heard him yell, then get cut off. So I quickly stuck my head back inside the church but couldn't see him," I replied. "What do we do, guys? I don't want to set foot in there. There's something not right in that hole, and I think we let it out," said Anatol. "I don't either, but he's our friend, and we don't leave friends behind," said Alex. Right after Alex had finished his sentence, we again heard the cries of a baby, coming from inside the church. We all looked at each other with looks of terror on our faces. We immediately turned and took off running towards the car. As I ran towards the car, all I could think about was getting as far away from the church as possible. We wasted no time jumping into the car, with me sitting shotgun. Alex fired up the engine, turned on the lights, and was about to get the hell out of there when suddenly there in front of the car was an old man. He was dressed like an old world Russian Orthodox priest. He had a long white beard and a sheer look of evil in his eyes as he stared at us. Before Alex could put it in drive, the priest was at his window. He put both of his arms through the glass, breaking it as if it was nothing. He grabbed Alex, pulled him out of the car, then started dragging him towards the church. I sat there as I watched the priest easily rip off the large piece of plywood from the door and drag Alex kicking and screaming inside with him. Anatol and I sat there in shock for what seemed like minutes but was more likely seconds, when he quickly moved into the driver's seat and said, "We need to get out of here now, man." I just nodded my head in agreement. Anatol then slammed the car into drive and took off as fast as the old car would go, leaving a cloud of dust in the old dirt parking lot. As we drove down the street, we kept looking behind us, expecting to see the priest. "What do we do now? Where should we go?" asked Anatol. "We need to go to the police, but I want to go home first. My parents need to hear this from me first," I replied. Anatol nodded his head and started driving towards my house. When we got to my home, we went inside and told my parents everything that had taken place, starting from when we first started snatching buckets of candy from the kids. My mother then told us a story I shall never forget. "Oh God, no, you didn't. I can't believe you went inside that church. It's boarded up for a reason, and we've told kids for decades to stay away." When I was 7 years old, people started mysteriously disappearing from town. Every Halloween, 1 to 2 people would completely vanish. This went on for almost 10 years before the town figured out what it was. I remember one night coming home from being out with my friends. When I walked inside the house, there were several men from town and my father sitting in the living room, having a serious discussion in Russian about something. As I took off my shoes and coat, I remember hearing the word Drakovok spoken several times by some of the men. They also talked about the priest who ran the main church in town. He'd immigrated to our town about 12 years before. At the time, I didn't know what the word Drakovok meant. As I was about to head to my room for the night, my father spoke up and told me, my mother, and my siblings to come into the living room. He sat us down and told us a horrifying story. He said he and some of the men in town had figured out why people had been disappearing on Halloween over the last 10 years. Apparently, the priest had developed a taste for human flesh back in Russia, and had also brought with him a creature known as a Drakovok. It's an ancient Slavic creature about the size of a large baby. It has long claws, black fur, and prefers eating the meat of humans. When the men, including my father, figured out it was the priest and the Drakovok, they went to the church to deliver their own justice. While there, they discovered the room and dark hole where the priest had been keeping the Drakovok. They thought they'd killed the priest, then tossed his body into the hole and locked the door. Only my father had the key and kept it with him until his death. Now, I keep it safe. We sat there in disbelief after hearing my mother tell us that story. My mother then walked into the kitchen, picked up the phone, and called the chief of police, saying, "Victor, this is Svieta. It's begun again." She then told him what I'd said, hung up the phone, then came back into the room. "Victor and some other men are going to handle it. This time, other measures will be put in place to assure this never happens again. You are never to speak of this again. It's your fault for being foolish that your 2 friends are now dead." After that day, no one in town or my family ever spoke of that night again. Every time I'd see Baron's or Alex's parents or siblings in town, they'd give me the most hateful looks, and rightfully so. I've carried the guilt of their deaths my entire life. I heard a big metal door was installed above the hole in place of the one we'd pried open. A big fence was also put around the church with signs warning people not to enter. I'd occasionally see a police car parked there and assumed they were doing it as a constant reminder to stay away. As far as the kid Anatol grabbed, we never heard anything about that. The police tried tracking the kid down, but nothing came of it. We assumed he ran home and left it at that. Anatol and I fell out of touch, and I haven't seen him in a long while. When I was 23 years old, I left Richmond, Maine, never to return, taking with me the dark secrets that town has been keeping for so long. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.